with that, let's welcome Matt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you to CAAD for hosting this, and thank you all for attending. I'll first mention that this comes from a place of gratitude. I feel like just pinch myself. I'm so thrilled to be in this position of a dream that I had for a very long time to be an architect and to be involved in academics. And there are a lot of challenges that come with it, but I feel very fortunate to be here and to share part of what I do and what we do as a practice. The topic here is intentionally a little bit misleading, of climates, concepts, and tectonics. Climates, we often tend to use that word. Most frequently we think of climate change or environmental climate. And that's a sliver of what I'll be referring to, but I'm going to expand that a little bit more to talk about other types of climates and influences on architecture and a lot of what we do. So if we think about climates, we've obviously recently gone through an epidemiological crisis with the pandemic, and how that's a force that's influenced a lot of our work in different types of ways. Geopolitical climates have an influence on a lot of the work that we do, and architecture and policy in general, and that can be related to economic climates. Sometimes those two things are related. We've had clients that have told us, well, we're going to wait until the war in Ukraine stops until we start a project, as an example. It's a very concrete example. Or we've heard, we're going to wait until the election and see what happens with the election to decide if we're going to proceed with this project or not, or in what fashion, or if this project is even fathomable after a certain election. And then, of course, environmental climates. And so, using that term climate a little more broadly to talk about overall larger trends, it has to do with pattern recognition, which is a really big part, I think, of the architectural process. And these are all forces that shape what we do. We like to think that it's important to try to understand this. One way to talk about this is understanding context. We often talk about context in architecture to be adjacent to buildings or maybe a neighborhood. But there really are so many different factors, and we try to understand those constraints and turn them into opportunities. We see these as opportunities for creative problem solving. So part of my academic and sort of scholarly trajectory has been a series of journals and a book that I co-authored with Dason Whitsitt called Architectural Science in the Sun. And this looks very much at environmental climate and solar response of architecture. But I'm arguing that really that's one of a series of things that influence what we do. And now in terms of concepts, there are also a lot of different ways to define concepts. This is certainly not a definitive list of different types of concepts. But programmatic concepts, spatial concepts, formal concepts, and experiential concepts, and these things begin to overlap. And all of these have to do, from our perspective, to do with relationships. How do things interact with one another at the program scale, spatial scale, formal scale, or experiential scale? How do we think about reference? And also being aware, diagrams are a big part of this. Sketches, diagrams, abstract drawings are a really important part of this. Part of abstraction requires editing and dialing down to what priorities are with a given agenda or a given design, and comes back to the principle that effectively all drawings are lies. No drawing represents everything. It's deciding what you are going to represent, what you're going to prioritize, and how that can help navigate through a design process. I'd like to take a moment to credit the team at MF Architecture. I'm fortunate to work with a lot of fantastic people. I'll introduce you all I'll give Sarah a moment to speak for a little bit later, but I just want to generally credit the team. All of the work that I'm going to show today absolutely happened through a team effort. We pride ourselves in being collaborative and really challenging each other internally, and also collaborating with external stakeholders, GCs, consultants, our clients, trying to be thoughtful and then ultimately being reflective and learning from the work that we've done and continuing to evolve and grow. 5 of our current team members are UTSOA alums. Very grateful for that. And then a plug here that I'll mention that we're going to be at the Career Fair on February 22nd here. We're looking to hire at least one recent grad this summer. So please let us know if you're interested. From a broad profile, this is, again, in a lot of ways just mind-blowing to me in terms of of what we've been able to achieve. But we've, over the past 10 or 15 years, been able to complete 100 buildings, most of them residential with a fair amount commercial. We typically have about 20 projects live at a given moment. I've been fortunate to receive 50 design awards and honors at different scales. Depending on exactly where you count from, about 14 years in practice with my co-principal, architect Sarah Johnson. We have 9 current team members, but have had about 96 employees over the past 14 years, including interns and full-time employees, many of them UTSOA grads that have contributed a lot, and then a lot of different references and citations of our work. We like to think that no two of our projects look identical because we take seriously all the criteria that I've described in terms of these different forces that shape the work, as opposed to us going off into a laboratory and cooking up a formal interest or forms that we like and then stamping them out everywhere. We're very much driven by what all the influences are. And in terms of this publications and citations of work, I show this just to show this the magnitude of what that is, and something that I never could have imagined when we launched. That the sort of this is just the print, some of the print versions from the past 5 years. This type of reach and impact is it's flattering, but it's also helpful to have this sort of feedback and get effectively peer review, popular press review, and be able to respond to that accordingly. Really broadly, our design philosophy, all of our work is emergent from site form and site function and experience. So there are these consistent threads of inquiry that we have throughout the work, and including starting there. Functionality, we believe in modernism with a capital M, this notion that form follows function generally. That, of course, doesn't mean that we don't care about form. It'd be disingenuous to suggest we don't care about form. We absolutely care about form. But starting with thinking about what a site allows, what a program allows, what opportunities we have in terms of how something might function and perform, and allowing that to be a driver. And then sustainability for us is an interesting term. It's become ubiquitous and whitewashed over the years, or greenwashed. It's become kind of just used too much. But we like to think that at the root, all of our projects come back to the base root of that term, to sustain. What does it mean for something to be timeless? And ultimately, it has to not be self-referential to do that. It has to be able to relate and connect to something else. And so to be able to endure over time, that often does mean responding to some type of contextual clues or climates, as I've used the word earlier. I wanted to just mention that one of the things that I've referenced over the years is the UTSOA mission and vision, and highlighting a few points to do with this that's shown in red here, of being aware of our role as stewards of the built environment, to meld principle and practice, or then thinking about creative community and an entrepreneurial spirit, and then trying to gain firsthand experience with a rapidly growing and changing built environment. And that's rapidly increasing all the time. We're in an incredible changing laboratory, changing environment, changing landscape. We're in an urban laboratory that's rapidly growing in every dimension. And I think it makes sense to tap into that with the work that we do. We obviously, and absolutely, we should have theoretical and conceptual work that we do in a bubble and in school, but then being able to think about opportunities of what does it mean to intervene within our actual context and community. And the same thing at the university scale. When we think of academics, we often think about theory, a pure theory, and a more of a laboratory base. But even at the UT scale, they talk about the advancement of society through research, creative activity, scholarly inquiry, and the development, the dissemination of new knowledge to preserve and promote the arts. Those types of things embolden a bit of the agenda of trying to meld theory with actually practicing and making a physical impact in the built environment. So mostly I'll show 5 projects. I'll show a couple of extras at the end that we haven't spoken about publicly before that are just about to be released, so to speak. Each of these projects are sort of generally indicative of our body of work and embody a lot of the different philosophies. At the same time, none of them look physically identical at all. The first is the Mount Sharp residence, and here when we talk about climate, this one is a little more specifically related to this notion of environmental climate. It was also related to, designed for a couple who are empty nesters, or close to being empty nesters, and had purchased this land in Wimberley and had spent many weekends sitting out in lawn chairs under different groves of trees, examining the property and you know, fantasizing about what it might be to retire there at some point, and engaged us to design this home for them. And there are so many different factors that go into that. One of them being one of the clients was much more interested in very sort of clean-lined, harsh modernism. The other one was much more interested in a little more traditional hill country aesthetic and trying to merge those two influences. And at the same time, trying to respond very carefully to the lot itself. And one of the big drivers was to do with thinking about how we embrace the slope on the site and think about the horizontal walls and the roof planes. Are there ways that we can think about that in a little bit of a different way? Alongside that, planimetrically thinking about, is there a way that we could consolidate masses of all of the back of house components to allow for views to the south, where we have the south sun that we can shade from an overhang. There are also prevailing breezes that come up from the southeast. So to effectively line up all the solid program, like a school of fish in the current, to all line up to be able to allow for openings everywhere else. And so at the same time, thinking about what does it mean to have a linear configuration of how people flow, you know, how the users flow through to park and sleep, live, eat, gather, swim, visit, paint. You know, how do we think about those sort of functional flows? And so, for example, this entry here that's framed with between these two solids is seen here, where so that one solid on the right and another solid on the left, two different material cladding strategies, but frame to that view beyond and allow that light into the space. Likewise, the shed roof, the overhang here, prevents summer sun from getting into the spaces and allows winter sun in for just the coolest 3 months. And you know, again, tying back a bit to some of the principles from the book that Dason and I wrote, and at the same time challenging, picking up on that hill country vernacular and challenging and breaking it down a little bit and thinking, is there a way we could rethink that relationship between wall and roof and plane, and ultimately making it about experiencing something beyond. Rather than the architecture being an object to behold and pounding its chest on the hill, how can it become a frame or a lens for us to understand the landscape around us and to appreciate it? A filtered frame dock is quite a small project in stature, but has had quite an impressive, surprisingly impressive reach. The idea here, and this is partly constrained in size by code in terms of being 14 foot wide, 30 feet long, 30 feet tall, is a very tight envelope that needed to operate within. And the strategy was to isolate a structural steel frame and then some very specific planes, that a roof plane and screens that operate in and around that. The driving force for that is the client asked to have some sun and some shade on the upper deck every day of the year. And so the way that we struck that balance was on the solar equinox to have 50% sun, 50% shade, both through the geometry of the roof plane itself, this folded steel plate of the roof plane, and then the apertures of the screens, which allow for breezes and filtered views. So that calibration is a lot of what was driving this, while of course still sculpting this form. Here we see a bit of proof of concept of that combination of shade and sun on that roof terrace. And here we can see, when we talk about climate here, we're talking about bridging an ecotone, of going from land to water, becoming a framework to understand and appreciate the sky. And here, trying to dissolve a bit of the components of each individual one, having the floating plane, the floating roof, the cantilevered element, the wood staircase that connects up to this sort of still life, so to speak, that straddles these two different realms. And to give another example of a climate to do with this. Our client, this finished construction just before the pandemic, and our client reached out to us to express that this was literally a lifesaver for him, having gone through a lot of personal challenges. This was a moment of a place of repose, to be able to gather and to have solitude, and really as a transformative structure. And those types of things are quite meaningful. So again, it's about this is about thinking about an overall frame, boiling it down to an exposed structural frame, these different planes, which of course you can get away with an open air passive structure, more like a pavilion. There are opportunities allowed here, but taking inspiration even from the way that trees dapple light through, and then thinking about simulating that at the scale of the building tectonics. Westlake Dermatology Marble Falls is an interesting commission. Like the thought of designing a medical office building, it doesn't sound the most inspiring at face value when you think about our associations of a medical office building is typically a fluorescent lit space with dropped acoustic panels. You're following signage. There's the wayfinding, and you're usually parking on a sea of asphalt and just entering into a not so inspiring space, let's say. And that was what we appreciated about this client, was interested in reversing that. Let's create a space for wellness. It turns out that only 8% of all Americans go for preventative health checkups. Usually people wait until something's terribly wrong and are going to have illness treated. And so part of the goal here is could we create architecture that could actually inspire people to want to go, skin cancer being a huge, in addition to doing cosmetic dermatology, they also treat a lot of skin cancer. Skin cancer is a very big problem in our region. Could we create facilities where people actually be inspired to arrive at them? And so one of the goals here conceptually was to create a concrete portal that would become a frame a frame between the highway and to the hill country landscape beyond. And then within that, a wooden portal that delineates the public function from the exam, the sort of business function on the other side. And so being able to literally dissolve that approach and having that visual axis through, and this cleansing of moving into the space, and to remove the stigma of going to the doctor, and allowing this space to really just feel hopefully transcendent and beyond the typical expectations. So this being the common area, the retail waiting area, and then passing through that wooden portal within the concrete volume to get back to the exam and prep room where the Mohs lab and the technical components all exist. And part of this is, of course, creating a beacon on the landscape, which was very important to the client as well. It was very important for this to be a landmark building that people would talk about, that would be its own sort of signage for the business. And when I was on site with the architectural photographer taking photos, a staff member came running out, and I was concerned that they were going to, even though I had permission from the owner to take photographs, they were going to say, please don't take photographs, we might have patients, we need to respect privacy. And instead, she came out and said, I just wanted to tell you that, because of this building, I look forward to coming to work every day. I just want to let you know this has changed my life. Like, for the first time in my life, actually, I'm really excited to come to work. And I think that gets paid forward to the patients. Like, if the staff are happy, the patients are treated better. And this was a photo that she posted on her Instagram later. And so there's this relationship between all the tectonics and technical issues that are resolved to achieve this very clean container, this very clean box, to honor or try to realize a very clear concept. This is all worth it. I mean, no matter how much press recognition you get and peer awards, those are all great to get. But when the end user is absolutely fulfilled, that's fantastic too. Sarah and I were fortunate to be invited to present this at Arc Marathon in Miami, where they honor what they consider the top 50 buildings in the Americas every year. So it was really kind of crazy to be right next to, for example, the Mercedes-Benz Dome, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium by HKS, HKS, and so again, this building being one that came from a very clear concept and then kind of, working it all the way through. And we've been fortunate to work with this client on new iterations of different, of 4 locations now. So I'm gonna have Sarah talk a little bit about the next project.
Yeah, I was telling Matt when we sat down, I think the last time I was in this room was I was on a student-led committee to help interview for his position, actually. I just put that together. So it's interesting to be back in the seat, I guess now 15 years later. It's very rewarding to work in a conceptual practice and get to think these things that you have in school and to be able to actually realize that in the real world. Much like in school, you spend time toiling over these ideas and these projects and you become very attached to them, you become very attached to the clients. Almost at the end of the project, you have to remind yourself that this isn't, you don't get to walk in the door and live here or work here every day, that like, oh, I guess I have to leave now and you get to enjoy this space. So it's very rewarding and challenging at the same time. The stakes are a lot higher than in school. There's a lot of money involved. People's, forever Christmases are involved in these decisions. And so anyway, it's very rewarding. But this project in particular is, we call it the Descendant House. It is socially a descendant house. It has multiple generations living in this house. Also, the site is very sloped, as you can tell from the site section. And then also the architecture itself responds to that as it descends down the site. This client approached us as a family that would be multi-generational. They had this incredible property off of Balcones Drive in kind of central West Austin. But this site came with many of its own climates and challenges to deal with. The topography is one. It had many beautiful trees and root zones to work around. It also had terrible soil conditions, and the house that was on the property was sliding down into the creek. It had a beautiful creek that needed to be protected and kind of revitalized. So those were many challenges that brought about a lot of unique opportunities. But also this client, they had this kind of unique way of living with a parent and a child generation, but also an elderly parent generation that would be living with them. And while they wanted to all come together and interact in this home, they also wanted to have their own space and be able to develop their kind of own family structure within this larger living space. And so we took all of those challenges. They also wanted to be very integrated to the lot. They wanted to enjoy this lot, even though it was a very difficult lot. They wanted to really feel like they were living on the property. So we took those prompts and those challenges and developed here a conceptual strategy that is largely based around the materiality of the project, and each of those materialities and feelings of these masses help us understand how those areas are being used, by who they're being used, and also how those elements relate to the site itself. So do those elements touch the ground? Do they hover above the ground? First, we have this masonry mass. It is the one part of the project that sits squarely on grade. It's very heavy and it kind of holds the project, and it acts as an entry and a threshold to the project. In contrast to that, we have this wood and glass volume that is much more lightweight. It does begin the cantilever over the site. It's a place for mostly the public together and the families to come together and occupy. Also sectionally on the site, we'll see later that it kind of interacts with the trees in a unique way. And then we have the stucco volume that sits, at the highest elevation of the project, and it kind of acts as this lightweight structure that disappears into the clouds and the sky. And it's really a realm for the parent and the child generation to live and interact separately. And then we have this blue fulcrum, this millwork piece that really unifies all of these different layers and levels. It collects all of that program, the back of house, the powder room, the coat closet, the pantry, collects it to the center of the project, and then allows the perimeter to open up to the site. This is obviously a photo during construction on site, and it's interesting to have these conceptual ideas that we spend many, many months talking about and refining and synthesizing, but then to see this actually come together in the field it brings a whole new set of challenges. You know, the problem solving doesn't stop at the concept and even at the drawings. Even in the field, we're still, you know, toiling through things and solving things, and going back to that conceptual idea is such a helpful tool, even at this scale and at this level. This is that masonry volume. This is entering from the rear, from the auto court. And again, it acts as this threshold. It's a moment of entry for guests that come up from below the site, guests that come from the auto court, and then also the main users of the house from inside. And again, it anchors this project to the site, and it sits on the foundation or on the grade very, very well. This is a guest suite that, in addition to the occupants of the home, they needed a place to house a temporary guest. And so, you know, another part of this is thinking uniquely about how to arrange program. And we know all the nuts and bolts of what a person needs to sleep comfortably in a space, but in the kind of work that we do, we're able to think creatively about how we put that together. And I think this is a space, you know, this wouldn't be a great space for someone living in the house full time, maybe, but for someone that's here, you know, for a week or so, we're able to maximize a very small square footage by using this headboard as a way to separate the bedroom from the bathroom. It still feels very open and very comfortable while utilizing a small square footage. This is the entry to the home. Again, you can see that masonry playing a part, guiding you from exterior to interior, dissolving. You know, this is part of that connecting the owner with the site, is dissolving the building perimeter. And even though you're squarely indoors, you still feel like you're, you know, interacting with the site. You can begin to see this blue fulcrum here on the left, and then again on the right, collecting those programs. In this case, a big part of the circulation is wrapped up into this and coils into that second floor space. This is that wood and glass volume. Again, you'll notice on the site, it's at the elevation on the site that's kind of in those gnarled tree branches, and even the materiality of the interior begins to take on some of what's happening on the exterior. And even though you cannot physically walk out of this space, you still feel very connected with what's happening on the site at this level. This is that upper volume. It connects very uniquely to the highest part of the site, which is also this lush garden. That was a huge driver for this family. They wanted a place to have a garden and interact with that garden. So the parent generation has their owner suite at the back, and it has this very private deck connection where they can come interact with the garden on like a daily basis. You know, part of Matt was mentioning with the Westlake Dermatology Project, that personal relationship that we develop with the clients after many, many months and years of working with them. You know, it's rewarding to come back to a project after it's finished and lived in. You know, we came here, my daughter was with me, and the owner of this project helped her pick her first carrot out of the garden. And that was very rewarding to her, and she was just, wow, you know, for her to get to see that and experience that was very rewarding in the end. You know, we're constantly thinking about atmospheric qualities, and so these are just a few of those experiences within this project. Again, being in those like gnarled tree branches. Normally you don't get to enjoy trees at that level. You're either kind of at the base, or maybe you're in a plane above, or, you know, but to be able to really sit within that space and just enjoy that part of the tree is really interesting. And then also, you know, how light and shadow plays a part in evolving the architecture throughout the day. And then on the right, that upper volume, again, at that point, you're above the trees. You begin to kind of see the clearing and see the sky for the first time. And so a lot of the windows and the articulation allows for that to happen in a unique way. This is the entry to the home where you see all of these components come together. You know, thinking about site strategy very holistically, how we approach a building, how we exit a building. It's not just about the building itself, but very much how it connects with the site.
Yeah, I'll just mention also, I can't credit Sarah enough in terms of the trajectory of the practice. I think it's and from every single dimension. It's you know, as I mentioned, so much of how we design is about relationships, and then the professional relationship with Sarah is so critical, that to be able to have a respectful dialogue back and forth and to challenge one another, to continue to really sharpen the process is so rewarding, and it's again, that's part of pinching myself here, is being like, this is just fantastic to be able to do this work and share it with you all. So we'll go a few minutes further here to share a couple of last projects. This Ames House, this one exists within the climate or the context of American suburbia. You know, this exists in Circle C in South Austin, where this is the typical building stock that exists, this sort of typical tract building home that many of us are familiar with from the suburbs, that most architects we would consider this inoperable. Okay, we can't really do much with this, especially when there's an HOA that says you can't change the way this looks in the front facade and 10 feet around the corners. It has to stay exactly the same. But we had an owner, a family that's actually really likes that neighborhood, the social component of that neighborhood and the school that their kids go to, and wanted to try to do something to check some programmatic boxes, but to really elevate the quality of space. And so the main intervention was really to just insert this wedge between a freestanding garage and the house proper. And so it allows for a few different functions, including an office on the upper floor to allow for working from home, but then also allows this opportunity to, within the staircase to get to that office, to allow for a dining nook, a powder room, storage, and other components that exist within that. The nickname Ames House comes from, there's an optical illusion called an Ames illusion, which has to do with moving through space and understanding a sort of forced perspective, so to speak. So what you're seeing here is actually drywall on either side framing this view as you go from the stock house into the additional space. And this is effectively the commute to work for the owner. It's just sort of ascending up the staircase and into the space above. And then again, because we had the latitude of being able to do something a little bit different and not needing to mimic that architecture, is always an interesting challenge to decide how much you try to blend in versus create something just discreetly and distinctly different. Here, obviously, the decision was to make something that really was truly different. One of the things that we've heard a lot of feedback from this owner, who has become a friend of ours over the years, is that even just the energy consumption has gone down. Even though they increased the square footage by 1,000 square feet, the openings, the quality of this construction has decreased the energy usage even through the summer 23 heat wave, while also then allowing for this live work capability, and therefore sort of lightening their infrastructural transport needs. This house is a house that's effectively a compound, really, and the nickname Octant House comes from the owner is very interested in aquatic things, let's say, and an octant is an octant or a sectant is a way of using a tool to measure the horizon and determine orientation, understand where one is at. But an octant can also mean two four-square grids stacked, basically creating effectively a cube. And we've made a bit of a play on that of trying to think about how we would create this compound of these freestanding buildings as a way, using the house as an instrument to orient oneself with the horizon between land, water, and sky. And so this is Lake Travis beyond, and so this was a rendering where we were testing some early ideas. Actually, this is a fairly developed idea. And then the built form, we were able to then break it down with almost a similar amount of purity to some of the original diagrammatic ideas of being this bridge between landscape and human-made, and then in some cases breaking it down to where it's a completely human-made component, but introducing light. In some cases, then really being about light and sky, and taking inspiration from Barragan and others, where this sort of courtyard-driven scheme. I also want to make the point here in terms of tectonics. It's actually probably impossible to explain the level of complexity that went into this to achieve. There's actually no mortar, no grout in any of these joints. These are all free floating. Everything is floating. It's basically like the whole site is like built like a piece of furniture, where there's zero tolerance at every single dimension, which takes an incredible amount of craft from the GCs, from the owner, from the architecture team, of which Sarah had a huge part of driving. And so just an infinite, I mean, probably thousands of details that are thought of over and over to resolve this, not just an issued set, but as you sort of evolve along. And even a similar thing to do with the coursing configuration. Sort of thinking about what are the families of stretchers, of 2-inch, 4-inch, 6-inch stretchers. How do we turn the corner when we're volumetrically trying to resolve ourselves? How do we create a pattern that's not too consistent, not too random? At every single dimension, and the same thing moving into the house in this particular skylight, or these indirect light components of at every turn, thinking about how everything comes together to execute an overall concept. These last couple of slides are a much more modest house in the Zilker area. This is actually a speculative house. So the name of the game with a speculative house is to be as economical as relatively possible while also standing out a bit on the market. The speculative house is built by a developer for an unknown client. And we nicknamed it the vaulted house because of this offset asymmetrical gable and vaulted ceilings within. But it's very much an exercise in efficiency in terms of an extruded footprint, a rectilinear box that's extruded up 2 stories, carving away a porch. These sort of large interpretations of dormer windows that fold up into the gable, the dormer space, the vaulted space up above. And then down below, fairly modest, not very large openings, but very carefully and intentionally placed to open out to the porch or out to a side yard. And then using the skylights and the vaulted components to be able to illuminate this space on a conservative budget in a 1,900 square foot footprint, to be able to pick up on some conventional norms, but then be able to introduce a little bit of uniqueness in terms of the material palette and a few structural maneuvers to be able to execute all of this. So lastly, again, I really want to thank the team and remind you all that we'll be at the Career Fair February 22nd. And just make this last point again, that so much of what we do is influenced by all sorts of pressures and forces around it. I think about this analogy of a diamond is made by such an incredible compressive force. And a lot of our work is challenged from so many different dimensions, whether it's the code or whether it's budget or whether it's site constraints, whatever the case is. And we feel each of those elements ultimately allow us to test it and test and test and refine and edit down until we wind up hopefully with something that's better than even the original idea. So a lot of it has to do with navigating these layers of complexity to arrive at design solutions that can work at different scales. Thank you.